What happens when a sleeping giant in the boxing world finally awakens? In 2024, at the Paris Olympics and the rise of Israel Madrimov in the pro game, this boxing nation has risen from the shadows to become a dominant force in the global stage. But how did this nation in Central Asia take the world by surprise, transforming from an underdog into a potential heavyweight boxing nation in the sport? Today's breakdown, I'm going to look at Uzbekistan's rise in boxing, along with some potential stars of the future, which could very well reshape the world of boxing as we know it. The Republic of Uzbekistan has a current population of around 37 million citizens, with around 80% of those people having an ethnic origin to Uzbekistan itself. Although Uzbekistan gained its independence from the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, their boxing origins stretch much further back into the early 20th century. Throughout the early to mid 20th century, the Soviet Union saw a host of some of the world's most talented amateur fighters and athletes, including the likes of Yashin, Lagutin and Lemeshev, to name a few. The sport was an important part of Soviet society, as it was thought to make an individual more well-rounded and productive both inside and outside of competition. However, the formation and focused development of Uzbekistan boxing would come from a somewhat unlikely source: an American, Sidney Jackson. The Uzbekistan Boxing Federation was founded in 1928, and Jackson served as its chairman for more than 20 years. The history of boxing in Uzbekistan is inextricably linked with Jackson, according to Uzbek boxing officials. Jackson, born in New York, started boxing as a young boy, winning featherweight titles in the United States as an amateur, before going on to join a boxing tour in Europe. However, he would get injured when he was out there and would have to drop out. However, timing can be a very funny thing, and World War I started, leaving very limited routes in terms of how to get back to America, and with no money, he found himself stuck out in Eastern Europe. Eventually, he found himself in Uzbekistan, without much money or any job. However, he did decide to stay in the capital, Tashkent, before the Russian Revolution then started, seeing himself join the military. After the fighting started to die down, Jackson returned to Tashkent to work as a sports instructor for the Universal Military Training Organization, due to his background in boxing. However, it was here he opened up the first boxing club in the city, and over the years Jackson went on to train Russian and Central Asian boxers who achieved great things under the banner of the Soviet Union. And to this day, he's the grandfather of Uzbek boxing, and has had an undeniable impact on boxing in the country. And since the fall of the Soviet Union, Uzbekistan has become one of the more decorated and competitive countries in amateur boxing, especially at the Olympic Games. And since its first games in 1994, Uzbek boxers slowly started to stamp their authority on the medal table, with 2024 being the pinnacle. A real turning point for Uzbekistan and its boxers was at the 2024 Summer Olympics, held in Paris. The way Uzbekistan dominated its competition with relative ease was nothing short of remarkable. Over the 2-week period, the Uzbekistan Olympic boxing team went on to win 5 of the 7 boxing categories, and it's safe to say this was probably one of the most impressive boxing performances ever by a single nation at the Olympic Games. Interestingly, out of the Uzbekistan 5 gold medalists, 3 were southpaws. However, when you take a deeper look at their training methods and the type of style usually associated with Uzbekistani boxers, the southpaw stance fits their stereotypical attributes perfectly.
That would be difficult.
Athleticism, technique, craft, accuracy, all the things you'd usually associate with that stance, the Uzbekistani boxers have it. I recommend you check out my video on why southpaws dominate after this video. But personally, I just think their approach is perfect for amateur boxing. Along with their intense but unique training, it's no wonder this has been a catalyst for their recent success in boxing. But the question I have, how will they fare in the professional ranks? And how will they handle that transition? We've seen the likes of Madrimov, Akhmadaliev have little to no problem carrying their style, and success over from amateur to professional, winning world titles. But with the Olympic boxing potentially being removed from the 2028 LA Olympic Games, could this push more Uzbekistani boxers to turn professional sooner rather than later? Interestingly, some of them were already professional in these Olympic Games, including Jalolov and Hansaboy, Nevertheless, amateur boxing and the development of boxing will remain paramount within the region, as they are truly treated like superstars out there. But the fact is, with the Olympics potentially going, the funding, accolades and opportunity that it provides could play an important factor in the impact of the current amateur boxers from Uzbekistan actually deciding to go professional. The question I ask, will all this raw talent prevail? Could they just be too good? And will they go on to have success in the pros no matter how challenging the external factors they face? Comparing this team with other great Olympic boxing teams of the past, it may provide some answers of what we're looking for. For Uzbekistan, their Olympic journey begins in 1996, held in Atlanta. This was the first time Uzbekistan competed as an independent country at the Olympic Games. For the Uzbek boxers, there was no sign of gold in Atlanta, but middleweight Karim Tulaganov did go on to secure a boxing medal for the country in their first ever games. But it was the Rio Olympics in 2016 where Uzbekistan really announced themselves onto the big stage, winning 7 medals, including 3 golds. And heading into the 2024 Paris Games, the Uzbekistan boxing team promised to do great things, and sure enough, they fulfilled on their promise and put themselves up there with some of the great Olympic boxing teams of the past, and it could very well be argued that they could become the greatest of them all. In the conversation, however, the US boxing team of 1976 is an important one to note for what they achieved, and some 40 years ago in Montreal, names such as Sugar Ray Leonard, the Spinks brothers and Howard Davis were all included in their boxing lineup, and in those games it saw a stellar performance, with 7 US boxers taking home 5 golds, a silver and a bronze. They would go on to replicate an equally historic performance 8 years later in Los Angeles, California. This team included some iconic names within boxing: Pernell Whitaker, Evander Holyfield, Mark Breland, and others such as Tyrell Briggs and Meldrick Taylor. On home soil, the USA put on arguably the greatest Olympic boxing showcase the world has ever seen, where they won a staggering 11 medals through the course of the tournament, with 9 of them being gold. A special mention also must go to the Ukrainian boxing team of 2012. 2 fighters that particularly stood out at that time were Alexander Usyk and Vasyl Lomachenko. Usyk grabbed gold in the heavyweight division, plus Lomachenko won his 2nd Olympic Games title, which is no mean feat, and something very rare we see. Interestingly, in these games, we also saw another 2 boxers create history and do the very same thing this year in Paris. Bakodir Jalolov and Hansaboy Duzmatov became 2-time Olympic gold medalists this summer in the men's flyweight and super heavyweight divisions. As we know, doing it in the amateurs and doing it in the pros can be 2 different things. The question remains, who will be able to carry the success over to the professional ranks? One fighter that actually stood out for me during the games was Abdumalik Kalokov, who's without a doubt one of the most talented fighters in the games and in amateur boxing right now. He had already captured gold medals at the Youth World Championships, the Asian Games, the Asian Championships and the Youth Olympics, and of course the 2024 Paris Olympics. Kalokov fights from an orthodox stance, while possessing athleticism and technique of a typical Uzbekistan fighter, not afraid to drop his hands while using Ali shuffles, slipping punches and throwing counters. Plus, he generally just does have good footwork, with punch speed and variation to complement it. So far his amateur record stands at 84 victories with 5 stoppages and 10 defeats with 1 stoppage loss. Compared to some of the great amateurs we've seen, his record isn't completely outstanding. However, his style, development and achievements in recent years led me to believe he's on the road to become a future star in professional boxing if he chooses to. For Uzbekistan, it isn't only the amateurs we've seen their success. Most notably, Israil Madrimov has already achieved what some fighters only dream of just in his first 11 fights as a professional. After a string of impressive performances, he would cement his place in the division on March 8th, becoming the WBA Super Welterweight champion after stopping Kurbanov in the 5th round. However, his most recent performance against one of the biggest stars and pound-for-pound greats in Terence Crawford put him on the map as one of the best in the sport, taking Crawford 12 rounds, something no one has done since 2016. And although he came up short that night, he managed not only to stick in there, but trade blows successfully with the very best boxing has to offer. Another Uzbek fighter who's made his mark in the pros is Akhmadaliev. And after only a relatively short career so far, Akhmadaliev has become a former unified super bantamweight champion, having held the WBA and IBF titles between 2020 and 2023. Fortunately for Akhmadaliev, he lost his titles in a close split decision to Marlon Tapales. Despite the loss, he still remains a top contender. and Akhmadaliev has also been touted as a potential opponent for the great Naoya Inoue, a fantastic fight that a lot of boxing fans would love to see, especially if Inoue stays in the super bantamweight division for a bit longer. While one fighter that has already turned professional is heavyweight Bakodir Jalolov, who won another gold at the 2024 Olympic Games. So far, his professional record is a perfect one, with a 100% knockout rate so far. With Olympic boxing potentially being out the question now, and having already won 2 golds, many think Jalolov's focus will now turn back to his career within the professional ranks, and there's no question, due to his performances at this Olympic Games, he's made himself one of the leading favourites to break through and challenge the very best at heavyweight in the not too distant future. It's been quite an ascent for Uzbekistan boxing in both the professional and amateur ranks in recent history. And since gaining their independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, they've quickly established themselves as one of the most powerful boxing nations around today. It's crazy to think that Sidney Jackson, an American who found himself in the Uzbekistan capital due to unfortunate circumstances, would help lay the foundations for a nation winning multiple golds at the Olympic Games many years after his death. And for me, the current crop of Olympians from this summer put on a spectacle, and most of them may turn professional in the coming months and years, given Olympic boxing's seemingly shaky future. The likes of Madrimov and Akhmadaliev will have no doubt inspire the younger generations and may encourage Uzbekistan medalists to turn their attention to the pro game and take over. Whatever the case may be, Uzbekistan has and continues to bring excitement to the world of boxing. And after their performance at the 2024 Olympics, they, in my opinion, will have boxing fans around the world on the edge of their seats as they start to compete in the professional ranks. This has been Jamie from Boxing Life. I'd love to know your thoughts on Uzbekistan boxing and which gold medalist from the Olympics do you think will be a success in the pro ranks. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.